with the theme Justice or Else. And it's funny, I bring this up because I talked a couple weeks ago and I teased it, but I never got back to it. There's a book called The Art of Seduction by Robert Greene, and I think that we need to read it. It wasn't written for us. It's not, Robert Greene's not a brother. It wasn't written for black people, but there's these times where I just don't think we understand the apparatus that we fall victim to. And so even for those of us who want to be African-centered and say we need to go back and learn about our ancestral heritage, and I agree with, I think it's important, but you cannot neglect the power that white supremacy currently has over the black mind or the African mind. If you do that, you do so at your own peril. And so we have to do a much better job of understanding, you know, what happens when we look at television, what happens when we listen to certain types of music, right? What happens when we go to church? What happens, you know, when so many of our people are subjected to social service programs in our managed populations, right? We have to understand the process of the American nigger factory. We just do, right? So if I were to say to you all, okay, you all went to college, okay, so pull your mic around here. Let's do it. Y'all know I always use y'all as an example.
It's the guinea pig.
That's right. So I just want to hear priming. If I said the word priming to you, how would you define that word?
Getting us ready for something.
Okay, good. Priming.
Doing a premature action.
Okay. See, and so if you, and I'm putting this out there because I want people, part of what I'm going to do every week for a period of time is really put these concepts out there. Because even if you just go to Google, because I want us to understand, you know, and sometimes I just say, don't watch television. People are like, oh, you tripping. So look up priming. Look it up. Google it. Go to some of the articles. Don't just stop at Google, but there are some articles. And again, I'm talking about the priming. That's a social psychological concept. And it's pretty much what you said. It is to prepare for something. It is to prepare the mind, essentially. And so priming is a technique. Back in the day, you know, everybody used to talk about subliminal seduction. It's not really that deep because it's a lot more banal than that. It's just everywhere. And what it essentially does is I can coach you or coax you into a response based on how I frame my questions, right?
Yes.
And you see it a lot. You know,
That's exactly what y'all did earlier. With his questioning,
right? But the way, right? That's one way of doing it. You see it a lot. You know, if I could give you an example, I used to do it. Television is the biggest one of it, but one of the things you see it a lot is, you know. For instance, when I read my piece about the community fair, right, and there was this part about the sponsors, and all in a row there are like 6 food-oriented things, right? There's like ShopRite, Canada Dry. If you call a spot, and I'm sitting there like I'm getting hungry, you know, because Amoroso's, right, and so that's called priming, right? It's a semantic way of priming, and that I can order information in such a way that I control what you begin to naturally think about, right? You see it a lot in tests. Where people would do something, and this might be familiar with you. And so if I say to you, you know, spell the word silk, right? So spell silk.
S-I-L-K.
Spell silk.
S-I-L-K.
Spell silk.
S-I-L-K.
What do cows drink?
Milk.
So you were primed, right? Because cows drink water, right? They give milk. They drink water, but you were primed because of the silk repetition, right? That's just a quick example of how priming works. So I do this in a lot of workshops because people would get mad, you know. You don't know what you're talking about. You don't know what you're talking about. So let's do it one more time. Let's do a different word. The word is pots, P-O-T-S. So the word is pots. Spell it.
P-O-T-S.
Pots.
P-O-T-S.
Pots.
P-O-T-S.
Pots.
P-O-T-S.
What do you do at the green light?
Go.
Okay, but it took you a minute. You had to think about it a lot because, again, the prime is for stop. And when you do it in the audience, people will yell out stop in a minute, especially if they say the word pots because they've been primed. And then when you ask them something, like they'll go with the word that they've been primed with instead of what the real answer is. And so priming is a very important thing that's used, again, in public relations. It's used a lot. I would tell you that one of the things I'm fearful of is that we're being primed for martial law, right? So I said to people, go back to the flash mob stuff. We begin to think about how that was played out and how they begin to prime about messages about swarm control and things of that nature. Then the Pope comes, right? And again, if you go to thehill.com, martial law or some version of it has been used twice in the last month in order to the most recent time was in order to pass the spending bill that they just passed on the verge of the government shutdown. The Senate had to invoke aspects of the martial law to allow them to run through the spending bill, right? And so what you begin to see is a lot of these municipalities and states who are having these brinkmanship around budgets, right? Even in the state of Pennsylvania, they haven't passed the budget yet. There's a whole brinkmanship, and what happens, they'll get to the last minute and then they'll invoke aspects of a state of emergency or martial law so that they can run through passage of a bill without it having to go through the normal protocol. And so as I look at television, it's like, okay, there's a lot of priming around, campus shootings and stuff. There's a priming that's going on there because what's going to happen is there's going to come some level of legislation that we will have been primed to accept as a result of our concern and fatigue over seeing coverage about campus shootings. I give you a perfect example. You would know this more than most of us would. When you went to high school, what was something you had to do, and you might not have had to do this at a charter school, but had to go through every day that for us when we went to high school didn't even exist?
Well, first I went to mastery, so right. I went through that kind of stuff.
What was it? Because again, y'all might not have had it, but I want to cut to the point because if you went to high school publicly, you had to do it every day, no exceptions. You had, and in order to get into the school, you had to walk through something.
It wasn't that we got checked every single day. We got checked for our uniforms.
And public schools is metal detectors.
Yes.
Right? They didn't exist when I was in school. The concept didn't even exist. But what happens, there was a streak of school shootings. By the way, none of them in black neighborhoods in inner cities.
Columbine.
Right? They were in Columbine. They were in Aurora, Colorado. There were all these other places. None of them in urban school districts.
They were all in
they were everywhere
suburbs.
else. But the only places that got the mandatory metal detectors were in the urban public schools, right? And so again, but we were primed so that people would then go forward and ask for this legislation as a result of this phenomena that in many ways was sad, right? But it wasn't something that impacted our reality. That's the power of priming. You can be primed based on association to answer a question in a way that's not necessarily in your best interest, right? And so again, I want to understand, as we talk about owning someone's head, who owns the head, we don't control the apparatus of consciousness control. And so because we don't control it, it's very hard to say we got to create our own thing. We need to do that, but we also need to resist what we know is designed to prime us, right? So priming is just one example. I encourage people to go back and really look at it deep. Go to YouTube and type in the word priming, and all of these instructional videos that are great with great examples of just basic priming will show up. You can prime people on anything. You can prime them around race. This country has been primed to hate black people. It's been primed to hate black men in particular. And part of that is this imagery that we see on the news, is what we are taught about ourselves in classes, in education systems, in religious settings and things of that nature. So we must begin to understand the process of who and how others begin to own our head and what we need to do to get our own consciousness and our own mindset back. We're during the dialogue. We're coming up on the last segment of the Shomari Show. 215-634-8065. Toll free.